Welcome to my channel. In this topic, I will cover some topics regarding Oracle Cloud Intercompany. What is these topics? Intercompany Overview, definitions with examples, intercompany system options, the setup also for intercompany transaction types, intercompany organization. Before starting, I just need to mention that I just try to give you the concept in a general information. So you can custom these basics or these general informations to match with your requirement, with your organization requirements. Because in some cases, if I give you some business cases, in 100% my current business cases is not matching, or it will not matching with your organization business cases. So it's better to get information in general. Depending on that, you will decide which options you will use, which option you will disable, enable, blah, 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 to match with your requirement. So let's start by intercompany overview. As you know, what is the intercompany? Intercompany means transactions that occur between two related legal entities in an enterprise or between groups in the same legal entity. Transactions that occur between two legal entities are called intercompany transactions. But the transactions that occur between two groups within one legal entity are called intracompany transactions. The balances of the intercompany transactions must be eliminated or adjusted when preparing consolidated financial statements, or it might result in overstated financial results, which in turn might lead to legal repercussions against the enterprise. Intercompany transactions can be identified and eliminated by the use of specific accounts to book these transactions. Defining these accounts allows you to book transactions that are identified as intercompany transactions in the specific accounts. These accounts must be defined as a part of the general ledger setup process. You have another option that intercompany segments. During define your chart of account segments, once you define the value sets, there is a label. A label means these segments, it will be a company, it will be account, it will be intercompany. One of them is a label or flex field qualifier. Flex field qualifier in e-business. In Fusion, the name changed to label. So also Fusion gave you option to define a specific segment in your chart of account structure as intercompany segments. This label in Oracle Fusion Subledger Accounting helps to populate a value in this segment to identify the trading partner for the intercompany transactions by using intercompany balancing rules between the legal entities. We will see it later. So to give you one example of the intercompany, let me navigate to Excel sheet. For example, I have legal entity Y and legal entity Z. So legal entity Y performs some business activity like consultancy, miscellaneous expenses, etc. for legal entity Z. So to record the business activity in books, legal entity Y will create an intercompany transaction. Intercompany transaction. It will create it by Y because Y performs some business activity to legal entity Z or Z. On submitting intercompany transactions, the system will create two types of transactions: outbound transaction and inbound transaction. Outbound transaction for legal entity Y. Outbound transaction for legal entity Y, and inbound transaction for legal entity E or Z. Okay, so legal entity Y is providing business value to legal entity Z. So to make this reflected in accounting, the value which is going to be received in future by legal entity Y is parked in intercompany receivable account for legal entity Y. And the legal entity Z is getting business value from legal entity Y. It is a liability for legal entity Z. So to make this reflecting in accounting, the offset of liability is parked in intercompany payable account of legal entity Z. Okay, to set up or to preparing the setup of intercompany, first step you need to finish or complete the general ledger setup. What does it mean that you have to complete the ledger setup, value set, values of the value sets, the labels? Are you going to define a separate segment for intercompany or not? Define the calendar of your general ledger, assign the retained earning account, define also attach your chart of account, currency, calendar, subledger accounting to your ledger, and assign also or verify legal entity assignment of the ledger. This is the important step to assign the legal entity to your ledger, because as we said before, if you have a lot of ledgers, so will be a lot of legal entity, and you attach for each ledger one or two or whatever numbers of the legal entities, and you will assign also the balancing segment to the legal entity. So the first step, you have to complete the setup of your ledger. For example, I will navigate to the Oracle. Let me go to setup and maintenance. Just search by ledger, manage primary ledgers, manage primary ledgers. There are a lot of ledgers. If I take one of them, for example, this, let me go to down to, okay, the specify ledger options. For example, these ledgers, as I said before, what is the name, description, accounting calendar, first open period, what is the accounting method, what is the retaining account, cumulative, if you have any rounding, blah blah blah, what is the reversal if you have, enable intercompany accounting. This option must be enabled to continue the setup of the intercompany. And you can define a sequence and account and document sequence either by ledger, legal entity, or for subledger as a payable and receivables, or no sequence. So this is very important to enable intercompany accounting. After that, you will go to prepare or complete the setup of your intercompany. Let's come back to our slide. This is intercompany overview. Before go to manage intercompany organizations, let me start it by manage intercompany system options. So let's come back to the Oracle, cancel, search by manage intercompany, search, manage intercompany system options. To start off looking of intercompany system options, as I said also there are your intercompany processing rules that you are setting at the enterprise level. So let's start by intercompany system options. As you see here, if I click on edit, you have intercompany batch numbering. Are you going to let the system generate the batch number as a transaction number? Because as I told you before, there are two transactions will be created. Outbound from the provider, inbound for the receiver of the activity or of the business. So the batch number of this transaction type, it will be created manually. The user will enter it manually during enter the transactions, or you will give the system to generate this batch or this like transaction number. Batch in intercompany means transaction number. Transaction number means invoice number, AR transaction number, GL number, all of this. So this is the first option. What about intercompany currency? You can enforce enterprise-wide currency by entering a currency here. So if you enter currency here like this, you enforce the enterprise to using this currency. Or you can allow people to enter their intercompany transactions in any currency, so you will keep this as a null. So either null or to enforce, you have to put a specific intercompany currency. You can also define a minimum transaction amount. So you can go set it 0, there is no minimum. So the minimum of zeros, so you can enter any amount of the intercompany transactions. Also minimum intercurrency, it will be once you put it here, the USD, dirham, blah, 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 it will reflect it here. What about conversion rate type? This is mandatory, so this is the rate type that's used when you are transferring foreign currency transaction to general ledger or receivables or payables. So it's very important to put conversion rate because it's required. Also, what is the types? If you know, there is fixed rate, spot rate, corporate rate. Corporate rates means I will define one rate between, for example, USD and Euro from the first of the month to the end of the month. Fixed, it's fixed rate. Spot depends on what is the current rate. Is there any user rate? There is no user rate. User rate means during enter the transactions, the user can enter rate during enter the transactions. Allow receiver to reject transaction here, yes or no. You can allow the receiver to reject the transactions. So you have got yes or no choice there. So we are being nice and letting our receiving or receivers reject the transactions if they don't like them. We have also got the choice here. We are talking, I just mentioned that the intercompany calendar. So this is, yes, I just need to give the receiver. What is the receiver in our example here? Z, right? This provider. This is the receiver. So once legal entity Y as a provider perform some activities or business to legal entity Z, create an intercompany, and once the receiver receive these outbound transactions, he have the option to reject or no. So yes, he can reject. Okay. The next step is the intercompany calendar. As you see here, you can assign the same calendar of your general ledger, and most of the cases, or most of the organization did the same. They not created any separate calendar for intercompany. Or you can create your intercompany calendar within your intercompany modules. So we haven't choice to have one, so we cannot open and close our intercompany periods independently of our GL. But you could if you have your calendar in there. Because once you put the calendar of GL, so you have to open and close either from transaction type, which we will see it later, transaction type of intercompany, or from GL dates that this period open, this period close, pending, and blah blah blah. But if you choose to use intercompany calendar in your system options, you can open and close period by transaction type. As I told you before, when you define a transaction type for your intercompany, you have the option to navigate to this transaction type and choose to open and close. For example, I will show you. Let me go to setup and close, setup and maintenance. Here I will put manage period. It will be manage intercompany transaction period. Let me manage intercompany period. Let me navigate to financials. Go to global, manage intercompany, go to down, manage intercompany period status. Here you can choose the transaction type. This is our intercompany transaction type. We defined it with the rules, blah blah blah. So for each transaction type, I can come here and choose one of them, select the period, search, and open or close or sweep transactions. You know the sweep transactions, this during the ending, the process of end close period, you can sweep some specific transactions from the current period to the next period. This option applicable in Oracle accounts payables, that if you have never validated transactions as invoices, but when you try to close the period will show some exceptions. Some of these exceptions that never validated transactions or invoices. So you have the option there to sweep these transactions from the current period to the next open period. Again, here there are three status of the period of the transactions type of intercompany: open, close, and sweep transactions to let you close the current period. Also, intercompany periods cannot be closed if there are transactions for that period in one of these status, which status sent, error, received. So sent, what is meaning of sent? You created one transaction, right? Where this transaction, we said outbound, inbound. Outbound for the provider, inbound for the receiver, right? So this is transactions. For the outbound transaction or inbound, there are a status. What is the status? Sent. Sent means this already sent. What else? Error. That there is some errors, you have to fix it. Or received. Yes, I am as a legal entity Z, I received this transaction from legal entity Y. So in these cases, before closing the period, you must move this transaction to the next period. if you or if there are transactions for that period in one of these status: sent, error, received. And intercompany period cannot be closed with this status because it must be completed. And completed means what? That this transaction completed from Y, this transaction completed from Z. So two legal entity finalized everything, put their accounts, either a debit from here or credit, complete everything. So the status will be complete. You got this point? Let's come back to our system option intercompany. So this is the calendar and period type. Also, you have the option to put the default transaction type. As I told you before, that in intercompany, you have the option to define an intercompany transaction type. If you define a transaction type, you can come here to default a transaction type. So which transaction type would you like to default into create transaction screen when you got in there? If you are always going in and intercompany close tax default blah blah blah, so then you will populate it with that. If not, keep it null. So null means there is no any default transaction type will pop up when you go to the create transaction screen. Then this is one summarized distributions for receivable invoicing, either yes or no. This controls if intercompany provided distribution lines for each transactions are summarized into a single receivable invoice line or shown as separate lines on the receivables invoice. You have the option to set yes, or if you set no, so the provider distribution lines, if there is more than one of them, then they will show as a separate lines on my receivable invoices. But if you set yes like this, it will just put one line on that invoice. I hope now you got what is the options of the intercompany system options. What about numbering, currency, amount, rate, calendar, default transaction type, and summarize? Let me cancel out of there and go to back, get done, and go to manage, enter. Let me go to home, come back, setup and maintenance to show you intercompany transaction types. Manage intercompany transaction types. Go to down, scroll down, manage intercompany transaction types. Again, manage intercompany transaction type. Here in my organization, we define all of these intercompany transaction types. For each transaction type, you have a sum of, for example, options. Whether or not you would like to make invoicing means receivable payables. Is there any manual approval? Also, yes or not. What about conversion rate type? The same spot, corporate, fixed. Descriptive flex field transfer. If you have some DFF as extra information for specific transaction, are you will transfer it or not? This transaction type enabled or disabled. And here, what is the IC intercompany transaction type? You can select it from here. And this is additional informations, either yes or no. I think the DFF, this default, this input, output, blah, blah, blah. So let me try to create a new one transaction type. What is the code? Transaction type, name. What is the descriptions? Are you make any invoicing from this transaction type or not, as a payable or receivables? What about manual approval? Manual approval means if you tick this, then you will set up approval rules to route the approval for these transaction types to an approval group. And if they are not marked for manual approval, when you enter your transaction, you will see that they just come back as approved because they don't need that manual approve. Then are they enabled or not enabled? This is up to your organization's requirement. This conversion rate type we discussed before, that when you transfer the foreign transactions, so what is the conversion rate will be used to make conversion between the foreign currency and the functional currency or GL currency or ledger currency. Descriptive flexibility as a extra information, this transaction type enabled or disabled because sometimes the user or the stakeholders told you please stop the using of specific transaction type, so you come here to disable it. And this additional intercompany transaction type, what else do these intercompany transaction type do? You can control entry of intercompany transaction types, but you can also control entry of intercompany transactions by opening and closing period by transaction type. As I showed you before, that you can close and open and sweep transactions for the periods depends on this transaction type. And so on, you can define whatever numbers of the transaction type. But once you enable manual approve, you have to define approval rules to route the approval for these types of the transactions. We will also talk about it later. Let's come back to cancel. And let's move to manage intercompany organizations. Now, system option done, transaction type done, period status I show you how to open, close, sweep, and now manage intercompany organizations. Let's come back to our slides. Then moving on with our intercompany organizations. With this intercompany organization, this is what you are picking when you go to enter an intercompany transaction. So you can create your intercompany organizations. After that, you assign a legal entity to them. That can be one-to-one mapping. So I might have my, for example, US1 legal entity and my US1 intercompany organization as a one-to-one mapping. Or you can have a multiple intercompany organizations mapped to a single legal entity. So if within a legal entity you have good organizations that would be transacting with each other, then you could set up US2 intercompany organization, US3 intercompany organization attached to one legal entity if you wanted to. Now, as I mentioned before, these are what you are going to see when you go to into put your provider or your receivers into your intercompany transactions. Once you have set up your intercompany organizations, you have to give access to the users that you want to be able to use those organizations within a transactions. So there is a task to manage data access set for an intercompany organizations. You need to go into there to pick your user, pick your role, and then choose the intercompany organization that they can actually access. So you can only initiate an intercompany transactions for those organizations that you have been given access to that users. Now, if the organization is going to be a provider that raises intercompany invoices, it needs to be associated to a receivables business unit. On the opposite side to that, if the organization is going to be a receiver that needs to record the payable invoice in AP, it needs to be associated to a payables business unit. And you can disable intercompany organizations if you need to also, but they have to have no any open transactions. For example, in here one intercompany organization to one legal entity as a one-to-one mapping. This slide tells you that you could map one legal entity as US1 to one organization, intercompany organization US1, and also US2 legal entity to one US2 intercompany organizations. But here you are going to make another mapping. This mapping is you have got two intercompany organizations with one legal entity. So as I said, if you want to use a manual transaction for intercompany activity between cost center divisions within a legal entity, then you can set up more than one intercompany organization here and assign it to one legal entity. Let's get into business or application to show you how to define intercompany organization, and also the second step, how to assign or give the user data access to this intercompany organization. Let's get into application. Let's again go to setup and maintenance. Again go to financials and just manage intercompany. Down here you will find manage intercompany organizations. Once you defined it, you will go to manage intercompany organization data access for users. I will click on manage intercompany organizations. You can search for any existing one by, for example, legal entity. Search. Here system will ask you what is the organization name, what is the legal entity, are you going to assign the receivable business unit, payable business unit, default contact as employee, and enable or not. If I create a new one, again, what is the organization name, for example, HR, what is a legal entity, it's a list of values of your existing legal entity. So I will select the HR. What is the reporting unit? Well, you have one. Receivable business unit, how many business units assigned to this legal entity will show with you here. Again, for the payable business unit, what is the default organization content, as which users will use this one. You select your users and this organization is enabled or not, because we said before in some cases you want to disable the intercompany organizations, but it must be there is no any transaction for these organizations. So you can come here and disable these organizations. Once you define, you will go to the next step to intercompany organization data access for the users. Like business units, ledgers, assets books, once you create them, you come here to give the users, depends on the rules, and to access to the business unit, asset book, ledger, legal entity, etc. The same for the intercompany organization. You will select the user here. What is the rule? The rule must be to any rule regarding to general ledger. Security context, you will find data access set and intercompany organization. So you will assign this user with this rule to the intercompany organizations and which intercompany organizations you are going to assign. So this is how to define intercompany organizations, how to give the users data access for intercompany organizations. Let's come back to slides. Before ending these sessions, there is one very important setup step is Intercompany Balancing Rule. I will cover Intercompany Balancing Rule in the second or in the next video with creating as actual examples of intercompany to show you how to create it, how outbound transaction is created, how inbound transaction is created, what about the accounting entries to make a balance between intercompany legal entity, two different legal entity in two different natures. Thanks for watching.